The luxury car dealership was bustling, customers strolling among gleaming models, and salespeople smiling as they sought their next commission. In the corner, the young, delicate, blonde employee discreetly arranged glasses and trays, trying not to attract attention. But a simple gesture, a misplaced towel, was enough for the millionaire present to explode in fury. Red-faced and eyes flashing, he lunged at her, shouting insults that echoed through the showroom. People stopped, stunned by the scene. The employee, trembling, backed away, unable to believe the impending violence. The millionaire raised his hand as if to strike her, and at that moment, a shadow appeared between them. Silence fell over the store. The millionaire, about to unleash his fury, felt his wrist seize up. A firm, work-hardened hand held his arm in the air. Everyone looked. It was the store's janitor, tall, muscular, his simple uniform still stained with dust and water. His eyes, calm but filled with indignation, stared unblinkingly at the richest man there. The scene seemed impossible, a simple janitor daring to hold the arm of a millionaire. The audience held their breath, torn between fear of what was to come and the anticipation of seeing his arrogance finally contained. The tension was so thick that even the shiny cars seemed to reflect the imminent fall of power. If you felt the power of this story in these first moments, imagine what's yet to come. Every detail holds a twist. Every silence conceals a weight. Take the opportunity to like and subscribe to the channel so you can journey together to the end of this narrative where destiny always reveals its face. The luxury car dealership gleamed like a modern temple. The windows gleamed under the artificial light, reflecting the impeccably polished vehicles. Each car on display was more than just a piece of machinery. It was a symbol of status, power, and vanity. Men in pressed suits and women in expensive dresses milled about, gazing at the chrome details and leather dashboards as if they were standing before works of art. In the corner, almost invisible, the young blonde maid worked silently. She carried a tray of glasses, refilled water bottles, and adjusted the small details of the showroom to ensure everything remained perfect. Her posture was discreet, her eyes always lowered, as if she had learned not to disturb the environment that didn't consider her a part of it. But that night, perfection wouldn't last long. The millionaire, a regular customer of the store, known for his arrogance and fondness for humiliating those he considered inferior, entered accompanied by friends. They laughed loudly, speaking in commanding voices, as if each vehicle on display already belonged to them. The group advanced through the showroom, leaving a trail of ostentation. When they passed the area where the maid was setting a coffee table, everything changed. All it took was a trivial slip. A tablecloth was misplaced. A glass nearly tipped over on the tray. Small details that would go unnoticed by anyone but not by him. The millionaire stopped abruptly, fixed his gaze on the young woman, and narrowed his eyes, like a predator spotting its prey. "Is this what they call service here?" His voice cut through the space, immediately drawing the attention of everyone around. The maid shuddered. She tried to respond, but no words came out. His friends laughed, reinforcing the cruelty. "It's not even good." "Enough to hold a tray," one of them mocked. The customers and vendors watching pretended not to see, but their discomfort was evident. The blonde lowered her head, tears threatening to fall. But the millionaire wasn't satisfied with the verbal humiliation. He stepped forward, his hand raised, as if he were going to push her or even worse. Her heart raced. She felt her body instinctively shrink, as if she wanted to disappear. The entire room tensed. Some gasped, others widened their eyes. But no. One dared intervene. No one except for one figure who had until then gone unnoticed, the store's janitor. Tall, his muscles rippling from manual labor, he wore a simple uniform stained with water and dust. He was crouched near the entrance, discreetly cleaning the floor. But when he heard the tone of the millionaire's voice and saw his hand about to descend on the maid, something in him flared. He dropped the bucket and broom, stood up, and walked forward with firm steps. The millionaire, overcome with rage, didn't even notice the attacker approaching. The maid, her eyes blurred with tears, only felt a shadow appear between her and the attacker. And it was at that moment that the course of that night began to change. The millionaire advanced with heavy strides, his face contorted with rage, his eyes flashing like embers about to explode, his hand raised threateningly, and the store fell silent. The blonde employee, trembling, took a step back, but there was nowhere to run. The showroom was filled with cars that gleamed like jewels, but at that moment seemed like cages. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo throughout the showroom. Then the scene changed. Before the millionaire could touch her, his arm was firmly grabbed. A strong hand, calloused from hard work, blocked the blow mid-air. The millionaire, surprised, turned his face and found the janitor's figure. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The man in the simple uniform, previously invisible, now stood like a wall between the arrogant millionaire and the frail maid. His dark eyes reflected indignation, but his posture was controlled. There was no fear in his expression, only firmness. "Let me go," the millionaire roared, trying to pull his arm away. The janitor didn't move. His body, marked by strength, remained static, holding his fist raised with the ease of someone accustomed to handling weight. His muscles, tensed beneath his simple uniform, betrayed that he possessed more physical power than the other man could ever imagine. The millionaire's friends laughed, as if expecting the insignificant janitor to be crushed within seconds. But as the seconds passed, the scene changed. The millionaire struggled, but couldn't free his arm. The contrast was stark. The richest man in the room, pinned down by the hands of someone everyone considered invisible. "Not here," the janitor said, his deep voice echoing through the space. "No one touches her." The silence that followed was deafening. The maid's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever stood between her and a master's cruelty. Her lips trembled, and a tear fell, but this time it wasn't just from fear, it was from relief. The customers watched in astonishment. Salespeople who would normally have pretended not to notice were now exchanging uneasiness. One of the guests murmured, He's holding his arm like it's nothing." The millionaire, noticing the stares around him, tried to regain his composure. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he roared. "I can destroy your life in seconds." The janitor stared straight ahead, unblinking. "And you think money buys respect?" Tension exploded in the hall. The millionaire's hand still held in mid-air, the maid shielded behind the human wall, and everyone witnessed the first time anyone dared to challenge him. And in that moment, everyone understood that that night would not end without arrogance being exposed in front of everyone. The millionaire's arm was still, pinned, suspended in mid-air by the janitor's firm hand. The scene seemed frozen in time. The guests, clients, and vendors couldn't believe their eyes. The richest and most arrogant man in the room, accustomed to controlling everything and everyone, was immobilized by someone he'd never considered worthy of attention. The silence was broken by the millionaire's own voice, which exploded in hate-filled words. "Let me go now, or you'll never work anywhere again." The janitor didn't back down. His dark eyes remained fixed, serene but filled with indignation. His voice sounded deep like a suppressed thunder. "Work is what I do with my hands. Respect is what I carry with me, and you have none." Murmurs began to ripple through the store. Customers whispered, some chuckled quietly at the irony. The millionaire, unable to let go, seemed smaller than ever. Salespeople who had previously pretended not to see were now standing still, witnessing the beginning of something bigger. The millionaire, red with rage, tried to free himself forcefully, but it was in vain. The janitor's hand was firm as iron, supported by the years of hard labor that had molded his body. The contrast was cruel, luxury against sweat, arrogance against dignity. And in that moment, everyone realized who truly was the stronger. The maid behind the janitor was breathing heavily. Still trembling with tears, she felt a relief she had never known. For the first time, someone had stood between her and the hatred of a powerful man. Her tearful eyes took in the scene and, even without words, thanked the unexpected hero. "You're just a janitor," the millionaire roared, spitting the words like venom. "Nobody here cares what you think." The janitor smirked, still holding his arm. "Maybe they don't care about me, but everyone's watching you now, and that's worse than anything I could say." The phrase echoed through the showroom like a sentence. The guests looked at each other, some nodding silently. The humiliation had begun to change hands. The millionaire, realizing that the eyes no longer belonged to him, raised his voice in despair. "Are you on his side? A man who cleans the floor?" But no one responded. The collective silence was their greatest defeat, and in that moment everyone understood that the millionaire's untouchable image had been shattered forever. The silence of the showroom still vibrated when the scene seemed frozen, the millionaire struggling in vain, the janitor firmly holding his arm in the air, and the maid behind him, her chest heaving with relief and disbelief. But it only took a few seconds for the tension to escalate. The side door of the store opened, and the millionaire's wife entered, drawn by the hubbub. She was elegantly dressed, wearing high heels, and had a haughty expression. Seeing her husband restrained by a mere janitor, her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "Let my husband go right now," she shouted, her voice echoing through the space like an order. The janitor didn't move. His gaze remained steady, and his erect body showed no fear in his heart. The previously motionless customers now exchanged discreet glances, some with muffled smiles of satisfaction. It was as if, silently, everyone agreed that this wealthy man was finally receiving some of the burden he had so often heaped upon others. The wife lunged forward, trying to wrench the millionaire's arm from the janitor's grasp. But when she realized his strength wouldn't budge, she took a step back, panting. The scene was unbearable for her, a simple employee exposing the family's fragility in front of everyone. The millionaire, humiliated, tried to regain his composure, but his voice came out louder than he intended, trembling and out of control. "You all, don't you know who I am? This man is finished. He won't even get a job mopping floors after today." The janitor lifted his chin and replied, without letting go of his arm, "If it's cleaning the floor, I'll do it. What you never knew how to do was respect people." The words echoed like hammer blows. The audience murmured in agreement. The maid, still trembling, let out a silent tear, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from justice. The wife looked around, hoping for support, but found only silence. Even the salespeople, who always rushed to serve the millionaire, stood still, serious, some with their arms crossed. The power the couple believed untouchable was evaporating before everyone's eyes. "Are you going to allow this?" the wife shouted, looking around. "He's the most important man in this town." But no one answered. The collective silence was louder than any scream. The millionaire tried to pull his arm away again, but the janitor's hand remained firm as if made of iron. Their eyes met once more, and in that instant, the arrogant man realized something that filled him with dread. He was no longer in control, and it was at that moment that everyone knew. The humiliation had changed hands. The millionaire, his arm still gripped by the janitor's firm hand, could no longer hide his despair. With each failed attempt to free himself, his helplessness became more evident. The heavy silence of the showroom burned like fire on his skin. He felt exposed, fragile, ridiculed before the same people who had always applauded him and bowed to his money. He burst into insults. "You're trash," he spat, his face red. "A poor wretch good only for mopping a dirty floor. How dare you look at me? How dare you touch me?" With each sentence his voice grew louder, but the effect was the opposite. Instead of intimidating, it revealed desperation. The guests looked at each other, shocked by the scene. Some frowned, others shook their heads in disapproval. The man who had always commanded respect through fear now buried himself even deeper in his own fury. The janitor stood firm, motionless, holding his arm up effortlessly. His eyes, serene but hard, unblinking. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was low and measured. "I hold dirt in my hands every day, but today I hold the biggest of all, your arrogance." The impact was devastating. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the store. An elegant lady clapped her hand over her mouth in shock, while a young customer muttered, "He said everything the whole town wanted to hear." The maid behind the janitor was trembling, but now it wasn't just from fear. It was from emotion, from relief. She felt she was no longer alone, that someone had transformed her pain into justice before everyone. Her tears fell silently, but in her heart something she had never felt before was born. Respect. The millionaire, desperate, looked around for support. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Without me, none of this exists. Without my money, none of you would be here." But no one answered. The collective silence weighed heavily as a sentence. Even the salespeople who had so often flattered him remained motionless, avoiding his gaze. His wife, pale, tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed fear. Her husband's every word sank him further. His fury was the picture of defeat. The janitor then slowly released his arm. The millionaire staggered back, panting like a defeated fighter. The silence was broken only by his heavy breathing, mixed with the sound of the collective heart pounding. "Now everyone sees who you really are," the janitor said firmly. "And no amount of money can erase that." The showroom, which minutes before had been a stage for ostentation, had transformed into a courtroom, and the verdict was already given. The millionaire was breathing heavily, his face flushed, sweat dripping down his forehead. After being released by the janitor, he staggered back 2 steps, trying to catch his breath and regain what composure he had left. But his body betrayed his defeat. The scene of a simple employee restraining his arm had already been etched in everyone's minds, and nothing could erase that image. Still, arrogance prevailed. He raised his finger, pointing at the janitor and the maid behind him, as if he still held power over the room. "You think you've won," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll destroy you both. I'll make sure you never find work anywhere again. I'll destroy your lives like crumpling up paper." The tone was threatening, but the effect was weak. The guests glanced at each other, some shaking, their heads in disapproval. It no longer sounded like authority, but like desperation. It was the pathetic attempt of someone who felt the ground crumbling beneath their feet. The janitor, serene, didn't back down. His eyes remained fixed on the man who had previously been seen as untouchable. "Words from someone who has already lost," he said calmly. "Only those who no longer have respect threaten." The audience murmured in agreement. Even one of the salespeople, always a suck-up to the millionaire, took a step back, as if no longer wanting to be associated with this spectacle of arrogance. The millionaire's wife, silent until then, finally intervened. She approached him, trying to restrain him, but was repelled with a brusque gesture. She recoiled, eyes wide, realizing her husband was no longer in control of even himself. The waitress, her hands trembling, discreetly wiped away her tears. But there was a difference in her gaze. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was dignity. For the first time, she wasn't ashamed to be there. She felt proud that she was no longer alone, protected by the janitor who exposed the truth to everyone. The millionaire kept shouting, "You are nothing without me. No one here is anything without my money." But each word sank him deeper. The silence of those present was heavy, but it carried judgment. No one supported him. No one smiled. The man who had always been feared was now nothing more than a spectacle of decay. The janitor took a deep breath and in a deep voice declared, "Money can buy cars, parties, and sycophants, but it can't buy dignity. Today everyone saw who you really are." The entire store fell silent. The sound of the fans and the gleam of the cars were the only witnesses to the moment. The millionaire, unable to respond, felt his legs weaken. The authority he always carried had evaporated, and deep down everyone understood. The turnaround could no longer be undone. The millionaire panted, trying to compose himself after the embarrassment. His voice cracked, but he still insisted on asserting himself, spewing insults that echoed throughout the showroom. "You're all going to regret witnessing this. I own this place. I'm in charge. I decide," he roared, his fury making him increasingly ridiculous. The janitor stood erect, his arms crossed now, as if he no longer needed to prove anything. His presence commanded more respect than any word the millionaire could have. The audience watched in silence, and it was this silence that carried more weight than any response. There was no laughter, no support, only serious, judgmental looks. It was then, unexpectedly, that a new voice echoed, not the millionaire's, nor the janitor's. The maid, her face still streaked with tears, stepped forward. Her knees trembled, but her eyes shone with a strength she hadn't even known she possessed. For the first time, she didn't hide behind silence. "I am not your shadow," he said, his voice choked but firm. "I am not the object of your anger." The entire showroom turned to her. The millionaire stared at her, stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. His wife, pale, took a step back, realizing her control of the narrative was slipping completely away. The maid took a deep breath and continued, "I kept quiet all these days because I thought it was my duty. But today I understood that silence only fuels your arrogance." The words cut through the air like blades. Murmurs spread, and some. Customers nodded discreetly. The janitor looked at her with respect, as if recognizing courage where others saw only weakness. The millionaire tried to laugh, but it came out nervous and broken. "Look, now even the maid thinks she can talk," he shouted, but his voice no longer carried weight. The contrast was clear. He, desperate. She, firm, even with tears still drying on her face. "You have money, but you have no respect," concluded the young woman, in a low tone but audible enough for everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. The sentence echoed in the hearts of everyone present, and in that moment it became clear that the humiliation had shifted. It was no longer the maid who bore the shame, but the millionaire, exposed before everyone. The millionaire looked like a man on fire. His face was red, the veins on his neck bulging, his gaze lost amidst dozens of witnesses who now stared at him without any reverence. With every word, he tried to rebuild the wall of fear. That had always protected him, but the bricks crumbled before they were even laid. "You think I fell?" he shouted, slamming his hand on the store's reception desk, his voice hoarse and breathless. "You think you're going to laugh at me? I own this town. A filthy janitor isn't going to ruin my reputation." The murmurs grew louder. Some guests backed away, others crossed their arms in silence. There was no longer any applause, no knowing smiles, only cold, heavy gazes that weighed more heavily than any sentence. The janitor, motionless, stood like a wall between him and the maid. He no longer needed to hold her arm. The mere memory of having restrained her was enough to show who was the stronger one that night. His dark eyes stared at the millionaire like someone watching a castle crumble. "Reputation?" he said, his tone grave and slow. "Reputation is built on respect, and you've never had any." The words echoed through the showroom like an invisible punch. The millionaire tried to react, but his voice faltered. His pale wife watched him from afar. The once sycophantic salespeople no longer approached. Customers discreetly took their cell phones out of their pockets, recording every second. The maid, still trembling, took a deep breath. Her teary eyes met the millionaire's, and for the first time she didn't lower her head. "You called me useless. You tried to get to me." His voice, though low, echoed in the silence. "But tonight, the one who will be remembered as nothing is you." The showroom erupted in loud murmurs, almost subdued applause. Her words broke the hearts of everyone who had, at some point, been treated as invisible. It was justice taking shape. The millionaire shouted once more, but his voice no longer found an echo. "This is a farce. You need me." But no one answered. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed louder than his fury. The humiliation was complete, and he was the only one who didn't understand. The janitor turned to the customers and salespeople, his deep voice echoing like a sentence. "Today everyone saw it, and no one here will forget." And in that instant, the millionaire, who had always believed himself untouchable, understood that his downfall would not come from a wealthy rival or a business dispute, but from the naked truth, exposed by those he had always deemed too small to matter. The showroom, once a scene of ostentation, now breathed only silence. The gleaming cars reflected not the beauty of luxury, but the ruin of a man who believed himself untouchable. The millionaire, panting, looked around for support, but found only cold, serious looks, some even contemptuous. There was no longer laughter, no applause. His image, built over years, was crumbling before his very eyes. The janitor remained motionless, but his posture spoke louder than any words. He no longer needed to raise his hand or restrain the other. The mere memory of having done so was already seared into everyone's memory. It was as if his figure, previously invisible, was now a symbol of the silent justice everyone hoped to witness one day. The maid, tears still streaming down her face, stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but firm enough to echo throughout the hall. I was treated like nothing, as if my life was worth less than the shine of these cars. But today, everyone saw who the nothing here really is. The impact was immediate. The murmur once again spread through the room, some customers nodding discreetly, others staring at the millionaire as if he were a stranger. His wife, embarrassed, retreated to the corner, unable to meet her own eyes. The millionaire tried to stammer a response, but the words died in his throat. No speech, no threat, could erase the image of his defeat. The humiliation was no longer the maid's. It was his. The janitor looked at the young woman and gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging her courage in finally standing up. She responded with a grateful look, but didn't smile. There was no victory in the air, only justice. Slowly the waitress walked to the shop's door. Each step echoed against the marble like symbolic hammer blows on a crumbling throne. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click of her heels against the shiny floor. The guests parted, letting her pass as if she were untouchable. When she reached the exit, she turned for the last time. Her blue eyes met those of the millionaire, who was now on his knees, his gaze lost, crushed by the weight of his own arrogance. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her look was enough to record the final sentence. The tables had turned. The door closed behind her, and the room fell silent. There was no more party, no more glamour. Only the memory that, on that night, a millionaire was reduced to nothingness, and a simple maid became a symbol of courage. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to see more stories like this.